Welcome into the quick crash course on the Italian game, which is by far the most played opening on amateur level. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and I promise that by the end of this video, you will learn to play it better than 95% of your opponents. Once you develop your light square bishop, putting it to this active position, potentially targeting his king, your opponent is likely to do the same, and now we've got this classical variation known as Giuoco Piano, one of the oldest chess openings, but still it's very trendy nowadays. If we wish to make it even trendier, I guess we need to make some rebranding, maybe switch from Giuoco Piano to a Gucci Piano or something like that. Sounds fancy. Now, at this point, you go pawn to c3 as white, getting ready to play d4, hitting your opponent in the center. Now, first off, why even to play this move pawn c3? Because it obstructs development of your knight, and now the pony is crying here in the corner. So why would you do that to your knight? Here's the answer. If instead you play some trivial developing moves, such as castling, d3, or you bring your knight out, it's alright, but after that, it's quite hard to come up with an aggressive plan or any specific plan overall. Like, what are you going to do next? Just develop. Okay, but how can you attack your opponent? And when you play instead pawn to c3, now you have this straightforward idea of hitting your opponent and launching your attack. From there, you're going to grab the center, have these two nice pawns in the center, plus you're going to attack his pawn, his bishop, and your pawn is ready to keep moving forward. Your opponent needs to be really careful here. It's hard for your opponents to say, you know what, I don't want to dive into all these theory, complex variations, I'll just play something simple. Because if they play a passive move, such as pawn to h6, let's say, trying to stop all sort of these things similar to the fried liver attack, that actually allows you to just execute your plan. Now, in this case, pawn to d4 would be very strong, but it's even stronger right here to all of a sudden push the b pawn forward, hitting the bishop, because once it goes back, you can keep going with your pawn. This time you're chasing away the knight, and all of a sudden black is already in trouble. This knight can't easily go back because it needs to guard this pawn on e5. Therefore, their only hope is to play knight a5, trying to counter this bishop on c4, but the bishop is not going to back down. All of a sudden, you sack this bishop on f7, calling the king out, and then continue with capturing this pawn while delivering a check to the king. All of a sudden, you're winning the game on the spot. If the king goes here or here, in both cases, it's going to fall under this fork. You're going to win the rook and keep attacking his exposed king. If instead he tries to bring the king back to the original square e8, it's even worse because that allows you to throw your queen into the attack and you aim for sort of scholar's checkmate on the next move. Therefore, they're trying to escape through this path, and instead of just delivering check straight away, it's stronger to first shut down this escape path by going bishop a3, checking from that side. So we hope him to play d6, and then queen to f7 would be checkmate. If your opponent tries c5, that is a moment of truth, because if you know what an en passant capture is, it's time to laugh. If you don't, time to cry, because it's one in a lifetime opportunity to deliver an en passant capture while delivering a discovered check at the same time, and on the next move you checkmate your opponent. Therefore, once you played c3, getting ready to strike in the center, your opponent can't be passive. They need to play something meaningful, and they're going to play knight to f6. This move develops a knight, hits your pawn in the center, plus black is getting ready to castle kingside. It does a lot of good things for black, and therefore it's easy to see why this move is the main line. Of course, we're not going to be passively defending this pawn. You're going to keep pushing to your plan, and you now strike, attack here the bishop as well as this pawn in the middle. Therefore, black pretty much has to trade. Now the bishop is still attacked. What can they do? By the way, I'm trying to really explain to you the logic behind the moves so that you don't have to memorize it. We're not computers, we're not supposed to do that. But if you understand the ideas behind moves, then it's easy to see why these moves needs to be played, and you can get them without trying to memorize them. Now, if the bishop tries to retreat passively somewhere, it's a pretty bad idea for black, because guess what? Your pawns will keep rolling, will kick his knights out, and it's pretty uncomfortable. You just develop your attack and your opponent is struggling. Therefore, the move that saves the day for black is the move bishop b4 check. That's the main difference. Not only black retreated the bishop from danger, but they also delivered this counter check, meaning you have no time to push your pawns as you have to cover up your king. You do that by developing your knight, and now black is still facing the very same trouble. If they do nothing, your pawns can go forward and chase away these knights. However, black seems to have a very simple and effective solution. They can just snatch this pawn on e4, taking advantage of the pin. Your knight cannot recapture because it's pinned. Moreover, your knight is actually attacked by black. Not only it's pinned, but it is attacked. Now, what do you do now? Your opponent probably expects you to defend this knight somehow by playing bishop d2, stuff like that. But we wish to be aggressive, right? The whole point of the Italian game is to seize the initiative, to go forward, attack. We're not going to be defending. Therefore, you simply castle. You let them be greedy and grab this knight on c3. But now they have to do something because you unpinned your knight. Now it's free to go and capture their horsey in the center. Therefore, they got to do something. Now, they can normally either capture it with their knight or bishop. And one of these moves is incorrect, but luckily for you, especially on lower rating level, most of your opponents will go in the wrong path. Well, they'll capture it by the knight, because it's very tempting. It hits the queen, and after you recapture, they can snatch the second pawn, hit your rook, and they're already laughing there, expecting you to move the rook right here, then they'll castle, and you're down 2 pawns for no reason. That's what they're hoping for. However, this is a classical Italian game trap, as in fact Black has already lost the game, even though they don't realize it yet. Now, there's also a funny moment here. A lot of classical chess books said that this move is refuted by queen to b3 with a double attack to the bishop, as well as this pawn on f7, and we target his king. Nowadays, when we have computers, we know that it's not true. Queen b3 is actually a mistake for white. But nevertheless, a lot of books and authors still recommend this move as being the best. Let me tell you what's the trick here. Now, the whole point behind queen b3 is this double attack. So we assume that the bishop needs to go, or else you're going to capture it. And if they capture this rook on a1, then indeed they're going down. You capture this pawn, attacking the king needs to move. If it goes, you play bishop g5, hitting the queen. The only way for them to avoid losing the queen is to cover it this way. And now you have a spectacular way of continuing your attack. You can throw the knight into the attack. You don't care about this bishop. You just go all out into your attack and you hope to checkmate them. And after Black plays whatever they want, let's say they wish to save this bishop and play bishop d4, they want to attack your knight, you play another beautiful move, bishop g6. You free up this square for your queen. And although he can capture one of your minor pieces, but he can't capture them both in the same time. And whatever he does, you can finish the game with queen to f7 checkmate. Looks so cool, isn't it? Then you may be wondering, Igor, so why not to go for that line? Well, here's the thing. After queen to b3, which is actually incorrect, there is a way for Black out here. It's the move pawn d5, and in case your opponent knows this refutation, they're fine. Now, they're countering your bishop, therefore you can't capture their bishop for free. And if you capture this pawn, hoping for the same double attack to this bishop and to this pawn on f7, this time they can just castle. And here's the difference. Because your bishop is on d5, you cannot win their bishop for free. In contrast to the previous variation. Here, if you capture this bishop, they're going to capture your bishop, which is standing here, not on the c4 square. And now Black is perfectly fine. That explains why queen b3, although recommended by many, is in fact a mistake for white. And because we want Igor Nation to always win, you're gonna play bishop a3, which is the correct way to go. The point of this move is to develop a bishop, but even more so, to cut off his king, so that he has to stay in the middle of the board, across this open file, and you're gonna attack it with either your queen or rook along the e-file and just win the game. For example, if your opponent grabs the rook on a1 and he's gonna lose in all the variations anyways, you're gonna play rook e1, checking the king. Notice that it still can't go here because of your sniper bishop, therefore they have to cover, but now you just grab the knight and you keep attacking. Our rook is defended. Again, our bishop is doing a great job right here. And if the king moves, you keep pursuing it. So rook takes f7, still guarded by the bishop, yet another check. Actually a double check, and if the king tries to hide, you have this spectacular double checkmate with rook to f8. By the way, it's one of the tastiest checkmating patterns, a king burger. Your opponents may try to avoid that disaster by covering their king first, and then just by giving up the queen, because we know that moving the king is really terrible, you're gonna checkmate it. Now, if Black tries to give up their queen, then of course we're gonna capture it. And then the problem for Black is not only they're down material, if you simply snatch this bishop in the corner, you'll be up a knight, but even more so, their king is exposed, plus they're totally passive, right? They have no active pieces into play, and that makes it easily winning for white. It's even more accurate for white not to capture the bishop straight away, even though it's winning as well, but to play queen e1 check first, kicking the king out. And now Black is at the crossroad, but both options are not very appealing. If the king goes here, then now the rook gets stuck in the corner, black can't move it into play, and therefore black is totally passive. Then you can just go ahead and capture this bishop and again enjoy totally winning position, extra knight, black is totally passive, their king is exposed. If instead they try to move the king here, which seems to be actually a more appealing option so that the rook can be activated along the e-file, then instead of capturing the bishop straight away, you can throw this knight into the attack, and after black does whatever, let's say they wish to save this bishop by going bishop takes d4, it's actually a 4-king checkmate. If your opponent is on a diet, it doesn't want to capture such a big rook, they're probably going to play pawn d6, trying to close this diagonal so that they can castle on the next move. However, now your rook is alive and it's going to become ruthless. We're going to play rook to c1, hitting 2 birds with 1 rook. We are removing this rook from danger, plus we're now hitting the bishop, thus gaining a tempo. The bishop needs to go somewhere, and we know that black is going to lose regardless of their choice. They can't take here because it's guarded by the knight. If the bishop goes here, then after the trade, this knight becomes vulnerable, and you can attack it either with queen a4, double attack to the king and knight, or queen e1, which is even faster with this double attack, and then you grab the knight on the next move and you keep attacking. Because not only you'll be up a knight, but again, you're also more active, so you continue your attack. Therefore, this is not going to work for them. If instead they retreat the bishop all the way back to a5, it's important for you to know the winning move here, and it's queen a4. We actually keep chasing the bishop, but the problem for black is, besides the bishop problem, they also have this pin, and you want to play d5, also attacking this knight, and they just can't defend against both of these threats simultaneously. In most cases, they're going to castle because it feels uncomfortable to have the king along the open file, plus their knight to be pinned when you threaten to capture it with your pawn. Therefore, if they castle, you still play pawn d5. Now, both of these pieces are kind of loose, and he can't defend them. Either you're going to capture the knight, or if the knight goes away, the bishop on a5 will become undefended, and then you're going to be able to win it. Moreover, in most cases, your opponents are going to play knight to e5. And after the trade, it's easier to trade here first, so that he can't take and disrupt your pawn chain. So you can take here first, and then you could take the bishop. But we're going to be absolutely ruthless. And instead, you can play the move which your opponent did not notice. Now, once the pawn relocated, all of a sudden you can snatch this rook on f8. And by the end of the line, not only you'll be up a piece, but you'll be up a whole rook, and hopefully you'll win the game from here. By now you know how to defeat weaker opponents, and now we're going to go to the next level, how to defeat those opponents who mistakenly believe that they are well prepared. Now, at this point, once you played c3, we know that they're going to go knight f6, hitting your pawn. We're not defending it, we wish to attack, so you go d4 with a double attack. After the trade, they still need to move their bishop, therefore they go bishop b4, checking your king, you cover, and now they need to do something about your center, therefore they capture this pawn. Happily, they're up a pawn, and they seemingly attack your knight on c3. We know that we're still not going to defend, we just castle kingside, we prioritize quick development, we wish to be ahead in development and begin our attack. Now they need to worry about this knight, and as we already know, knight takes c3 is actually a step in the wrong direction, and in most cases your opponents are going to be crushed really badly after that. Therefore, pros here know that it's much better for black to capture a knight by the bishop, and that is the correct move for black. In response to this move, all of a sudden, you're not recapturing. Now, there is a very important rule of thumb here to know in the Italian game overall. Whoever plays d5 wins. Like, if you're playing white and you go d5, very often you're going to win the game. However, if your opponent has time to play d5, then they'll be winning the game. Now, why is this move so important? Think about this. Right now, you're having quite a lot of attacking ideas in the position, right? The e-file is open, you can put your rook or your queen there, you attack the knight, attack the king, etc. You've got this active bishop, you have a lot of interesting ideas on how to launch your attack. However, if your opponent goes d5, then they successfully consolidate their position. Now this knight is well protected, they also gain a tempo hitting your bishop, they open up this diagonal for their bishop so that they can easily defend, they have more space, and once they castle, they'll indeed be just up a pawn and they'll be ahead. However, when white plays d5 himself, that changes the situation upside down. Let me just illustrate the point. I'll play any random move for black. Let's say white goes d5. Now you seize the initiative, you attack this knight. It has no convenient squares to go to. Either go back to the original square where it's totally passive, or go to the edge of the board where it does nothing. You're going to retreat your bishop probably, and this knight is still doing nothing, probably quite vulnerable to your future attacks, so that's not good. If he goes back, again, you have a ton of ideas on how to continue your attack, either across the e-file, hitting this knight, or maybe with queen to d4 with this double attack. If the knight goes back, you can throw the bishop right here, you can throw the rook, maybe push the pawn forward. As you can see, you have a lot of things going on here for you. This explains why in this position you do not recapture by the pawn. That would give your opponent time to play d5, consolidate the position, and enjoy their extra pawn. Instead, you play d5 yourself. Quite a cool move. And although temporarily you're down a piece, but you're going to get it back probably right on the next move, because now they have this bishop hanging, the knight hanging, and even this bishop on this knight on e4 is loose because it's vulnerable to all sorts of pins. Therefore, black definitely cannot save all of their hanging pieces. They're going to lose one of them. But you could toss in this in between move d5, making sure that you are ahead in the center, you're pressing, you have this space advantage. Now, if your opponent gets to this point, in most cases they're going to play bishop f6, the correct move, and if your opponent played bishop c3 on the previous move, probably they know something about it. That's why they're probably going to play the main line. Now here, that's another interesting situation. You still play an unexpected move. You don't capture the knight, which seems to be like the only meaningful move. However, the problem here is that if you do that, your opponent has some time either to castle or even to recapture and go d5, then all in all having this strong position after that. Therefore, instead, you play rook e1. You want your attack to keep going, and you still capitalize on the fact that he's got a number of weaknesses, and he can defend one of them, but not all of them simultaneously. Black will usually move the knight to e7, putting this knight to a safe square and also covering the king. Now you grab their knight, and at this point, black has two moves to choose from, either to castle or to move the pawn to d6. Very often your opponents will castle because it feels unpleasant to have the king in the center of the board, plus being exposed to this rook, therefore they wish to castle. However, that is actually an inaccuracy. It's not a losing error, but it is an inaccuracy because it allows you to push the d6 yourself. Because if black could play d6, they would be able to develop their bishop and have a good game. However, now you can play d6, attack the knight, and once they recapture, just notice that their bishop is now totally barricaded by their own pawns. It's much harder for black to complete their development then. And now you can play queen takes d6, and again, totally blockading their position. If you look at this, it's very hard for them to activate their queenside pieces while you keep attacking. You just wish to, bring the bishop, bring the rook into play, and keep pressing. Also, it opens up this diagonal for your bishop, therefore that may also help your attack. They wish to somehow untangle their pieces, and they're going to play knight f5, hitting your queen. You retreat back one square, also countering the knight. And if they go d6, which is something they wish to do, which opens up the diagonal for their bishop, plus defends the knight, there is also a really cool trick here. And it's not just a trick, it's actually a pretty good move to play anyway. Now, you play knight g5, threatening this pawn on f7, because you have quite strong attack against it. But at first it looks like just a miscalculation, because your opponent actually controls this square not only once with their bishop, which would be okay with you, but twice because of their queen. And therefore your opponent usually thinks that you just miscalculated the fact that bishop g5 just wins a piece for them, so they assume that you take here, I take, I'm up a piece. That's what they calculate. But there is one fatal flaw in their calculation. I'll give you some seconds so that you can try to find it on your own. By the way, I know that finding all these attacking moves and remembering all these variations may seem hard. Like, you don't need to memorize it. Again, you need to understand the logic of these moves and know how to find attacking moves in general. I've got a free masterclass dedicated to this, which will help you to understand these things as well as to calculate them properly. If you're interested, I'll drop a link below the video in the description. But for now, I hope that you could find the winning shot, and it's queen takes f7. You sacrifice the queen, they need to accept it. It's supported by the bishop, but then rook to e8 is a very sudden checkmate. Notice that the rook is pinned, it can't go back. Alright, now we see that this natural castling actually would allow you to push d6 and to keep your attack going, therefore it's somewhat uncomfortable for black. Therefore it's considered that it's more precise for black to play d6 first and then castle next, making sure that their bishop can be developed. Now you really need to think hard as white, because if your opponent can successfully do that, then they'll get away from your attack, will be up a pawn, and your plans are failed. Therefore, we wish to keep attacking. We go bishop g5, pressuring this bishop on f6, threatening to capture it and break up their pawn chain. Therefore, they need to take. You recapture with a knight. Now this knight is a little bit annoying. In most cases they're gonna play h6 trying to kick it back. If they don't play this move and castle straight away, you have a sudden sacrifice, knight takes h7, also hitting the rook, and after the king takes, you go for this check, and if the king moves, rook to h4, threatening checkmate on one of these two squares. Now your opponent can theoretically defend, and computer says that it is a draw. But I think that it's still a good outcome. As we have seen, there are so many pitfalls all along the way, literally at every turn. And if your opponent is so well prepared that he knows everything, then draw is a logical result because, chess is equal. If your opponent plays perfect chess, it's supposed to be a draw. This explains why, in most cases, black wishes to play pawn h6 first, getting rid of this annoying active knight. And now they expect you to just drive your knight back. They're going to castle with an extra pawn, but as always, we have some trick prepared. Now, in this case, I think that the move bishop b5 in a real practical game, especially in blitz, is gonna work the best for you. The classical move is queen e2, and it's about equal after that, but bishop b5 is much trickier, and in my experience, usually works really well. Now, you still maintain your initiative. You don't let black to just castle. And now, your opponents will usually cover their king either by bishop d7 or pawn c6. If they move the king, it's going to stuck there, and it's a bad idea. It's going to be vulnerable to your attack. Therefore, they need to cover it somehow. If they play c6, it's actually a very common error. Because first of all, they don't realize that this pawn is actually not defended enough. Their knight is pinned. But even more so, you have this sudden sacrifice, knight takes f7. With a fork, therefore they have to capture it, and now we're calling their king out, and it goes under our massive attack. You're kind of playing like Mikhail Tal, just sacrificing pieces, go all out, and capitalize on the fact that they're totally passive while their king is already exposed. Now their king is in check, you put pressure down this file, also you still hit this pawn, and you're winning here. For example, if the king tries to hide, you just go rook e1, stacking rooks along the e file. We don't even care about the bishop, we're going for the kill. The knight cannot move back. In this case, your rook will go into e8 with a double attack. So if they capture the bishop, for instance, you still capture it, and it's easy to see why your attack is so successful. You're using all of your heavy pieces to attack the vulnerable king, while your opponent is perfectly passive. Now the threat is queen to f7 check, followed by the checkmate, or maybe rook e8, winning in both cases. If they try to run away, you just keep chasing the king. The king needs to move. Now rook e8 would win, queen g6 is even faster, threatening this, or rook e8 checkmate. For instance, if they play here, again, you could play rook e8, but rook takes g7 is the strongest, leading to instant checkmate. The best thing that black can do here is to use their bishop to cover, and now they expect you to either do something about this bishop or do something about this knight, but you do neither of that. Instead, you play queen e2, another great move to keep your attack going. I understand it's a little complicated, but think about this. Your opponents probably know very little to nothing about it. So at the beginning of the video, when I told you that you'll be ahead of 95% of your opponents, I really mean it. Now, queen e2 basically is a two-purpose move. So you guard this bishop on b5 so that it can be easily captured, plus you keep stacking pieces along the e-file so that you can keep attacking. For instance, if they capture your knight, you go rook e1, now you've got 3 heavy pieces stacking along the e-file. This time they really need to worry about their king safety. If they castle, you grab the knight, plus attack this bishop twice. And after the trade, finally we ended the forcing line, and now when the smoke settles, we can evaluate consequences. Strictly speaking, you're down a pawn, they've got the c pawn without a counterpart, but realistically, of course, you are way more active, you control the only open file, you're attacking this pawn, you're putting pressure across the 7th rank, and therefore, certainly, we can't say that black is any better. In fact, probably black needs to be careful to equalize it, although objectively it's about equal. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions, and if you wish to know my 3 main rules to advance your chess to the next level, check out this video. It's one of the most popular videos on this channel for a reason. I'll see you there.